So March 2020, we were banished home because of COVID, as you would know. And what I had been planning to do for week 5 was to take everyone out for a walk. And the walk that I had planned was the block between Kintore Avenue, Victoria Drive, King William Street and North Terrace. So because we couldn't do that as an activity in seminars or workshops, what I did was go into town one day in that spooky time when there was hardly anyone around, and I walked around the block. I made a recording of me walking, with some help of course, and I then made a video because I was interested in some of the sights along the way and some of the attitudes that I had to the way in which I guess colonisation is quite literally stamped on the ground, particularly in that block. This year what I've decided to do, we're free to go out and about, but I've decided to keep in that video. We can still go for a walk, and if we choose to, we can go for a walk around that block and have a look and see if there are changes, particularly since I know that there have been new pavers laid along North Terrace, and I also know that there's a new statue of the Queen in Government House that we've paid for as taxpayers. However, I'm not too sure if we can actually see it without going into the ground. So a couple of things that we can check out. But in the workshops or seminars, we can decide whereabouts we might like to go for a walk. But as we're walking, we can think about the layout of the land. And you can use this video that I've made to think about some of the things that you might like to notice along the way.
We're going to head off shortly down the Anzac Centennial Memorial Walk, past Government House, stopping at the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander War Memorial, before heading to the Pioneer Woodman's Garden on King William Street and back along North Terrace to here, the National War Memorial on the corner of Kintore Avenue and North Terrace. I'm kind of curious about why I choose this particular walk, given that I'm a lifelong pacifist and Republican. Not a Republican in the Donald Trump sense, but a Republican in the let's stop having the British Queen or King as our head of state sense. Partly I chose this walk because it's convenient to the university, partly because I wanted you to think about the location of the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander War Memorials, and partly because the North Terrace section is very familiar to me. Most times when I come to work, I travel in by train, like many students and some staff, and then I walk down North Terrace. When I get to Kintore Avenue, I cross over and cut in, walking along the pathway between our various cultural institutions, the State Library, the Art Gallery, the museum, instead of along North Terrace. So let's get started. Here I am at the National War Memorial. American sociologist C. Wright Mills stresses the importance of the intersection of biography and history. He says, and I quote, "People do not usually define the troubles they endure in terms of historical change and institutional contradiction. The well-being they enjoy, they do not usually impute to the big ups and downs of the societies in which they live. Seldom aware of the intricate connection between the patterns of their own lives and the course of world history, ordinary people do not usually know what this connection means for the kinds of people they are becoming and for the kinds of history making in which they might take part." End of quote. What Mills calls the sociological imagination is this ability to understand the larger historical scene in terms of its meaning for the inner life and the external career of a variety of individuals. Part of my story is that when I was in high school, the world was in the middle of sizable challenges to the social order. There was the civil rights movement, protests against the Vietnam War, the beginnings of the women's liberation movement, and the gay rights movement. In Australia, we had a Labor government for the first time in 23 years, and Prime Minister Whitlam was an advocate for Indigenous rights and for free university education so that university could be more accessible to people from working class and middle class backgrounds. There was a lot going on, and I was influenced by it all. As a consequence of the anti-Vietnam protests and later feminist protests on Anzac Day against rape in war, and even though as a kid we'd always done something on Anzac Day, as an adult I never attended any Anzac Day dawn service. Turns out I'm not that unusual. From the 1970s, there was a nationwide waning of interest in Anzac Day. But the popularity of Anzac Day revived again from the 1990s. In a chapter by Ken English in the book Anzac Day Then and Now, numbers at dawn services began to increase from when Prime Minister Bob Hawke addressed men who'd served in World War I at Anzac Cove on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey. Numbers then gradually increased at the Anzac Cove over the years to 8,000 in 2000, then up to 17,000 before declining after warnings about possible terrorist attacks in 2005. Similarly, at services in Australia, at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, more than 20,000 people attended in the early years of the noughties. During Prime Minister John Howard's time, from 1996 to 2007, there was also a spike in teaching on Anzac themes in schools. And the centenary of Anzac, which ran from 2014 to 2018, is Australia's most significant period of national commemoration, says Veterans SA on their website. Not everyone is happy about this. Historian Marilyn Lake, for example, is against what she sees as the relentless militarisation of Australian history, and wonders why we don't honour other events like the implementation of the secret ballot or the 8-hour day. Claire Wright wonders why we don't celebrate Eureka Day. They're reasonable questions, I think. What does it tell us about Australian society that some events are commemorated with public holidays and others aren't? We have no public holiday for National Sorry Day, but we have one for a horse race, Band-Aid Cop Day. We have public holidays for the major Christian events of Easter and Christmas, but not for any other religions. In Adelaide, as you probably know, there is usually a dawn service held here each Anzac Day, as well as at other locations around the state and the country. There were almost 35,000 South Australians who enlisted to serve during World War I, which represents something like 37% of the men in the state, including Aboriginal South Australians who'd long been subject to discrimination and ill treatment, but served their country anyway. This National War Memorial was designed to commemorate those who served in World War I. Memorials don't just appear, they're the result of community debate. This memorial was first proposed in 1919 by then Premier Archibald Peake, but construction didn't begin on the memorial until 1928. Originally, the site was going to be at the entrance to Government House, but that changed in 1926. It was finally unveiled on Anzac Day in 1931, with around 75,000 people in attendance. If you go inside, there's a record room with the names of those who died in the war. It's a very sobering place to enter. Now here I am heading off down Kintore Avenue along the Anzac Memorial Walk. The Anzac Memorial Walk was approved by the South Australian Government in January 2014. It's intended to symbolically link the South Australian National War Memorial with the Torrens Parade Ground and the Pathway of Honour. Someone has collected together some beautiful photos of the Pathway of Honour, which runs at the back of Government House between Kintore Avenue and King William Street. According to Veterans SA, the Anzac Memorial Walk is, and I quote, underpinned by the theme, a memorial for all, not a few. The Anzac Centenary Memorial Walk acknowledges the impact of conflict on Australian society, both at home and abroad. The architects Grieve, Gillett and Anderson worked with representatives from the Adelaide City Council, Government House, Veterans SA and some unnamed cultural institutions. What was sought was a way to incorporate various what they call theatres of conflict. These are named in the granite pavers. I've chosen Afghanistan to show you because of the recent Four Corners expose. Anzac Memorial Walk was officially opened by the Governor of South Australia on the 23rd of April 2016. The walk meant reducing some of the land originally allocated for Government House, and it opens up a view of Government House. As I said, I'm a lifelong Republican. However, I'm pleased that our current Governor, who's been in office since 2014 and is the representative of the Queen in South Australia, is Hugh Van Lay. Hugh Van Lay came to Australia in 1977 by boat as a refugee from war-torn Vietnam. He's the first Asian Australian to be Governor in South Australia. A nice irony given Australian antipathy towards so-called boat people since the early 2000s when people from the Middle East started arriving that way. Hugh Van Lay is the 35th Governor of South Australia. Sir Douglas Nicholls was the first and only Aboriginal Australian to serve in the role of Governor of South Australia, which he did for a few months from the 1st of December 1976 to the 30th of April 1977. Dame Roma Mitchell was the first woman to serve as Governor, and she served from 1991 to 1996. Marjorie Jackson Nelson was the second woman to serve as Governor, and Marjorie served from 2001 to 2007. Out of our 35 governors then, 5.7% have been women. What does that tell us about the social order in South Australia? The Torrens Parade Ground was built in 1936 for the Army. It always had what historian Margaret Anderson calls an unofficial life. As citizens crossed through there to get to the city or the university, they made a desire line, until eventually the Adelaide City Council created a footpath up Kintore Avenue. There were also many protests against the Vietnam War held on the parade ground, and now it's the backdrop for the annual Adelaide Writers' Week. In 2001, the Torrens Parade Ground was turned over to the South Australian Government, and now it's home to various service groups, such as the South Australian branch of the Vietnam Veterans Association of Australia. Near to their headquarters is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, which was unveiled on the 15th of October 2006. This was the first memorial to the Vietnam War in South Australia, honouring especially the 58 men who lost their lives. The memorial was a collaboration between the RSL and a number of Vietnam Veterans Associations. It took until 2013 for a specific memorial recognising the Indigenous Australians who had served in all conflicts since the Boer War at the start of the 20th century through to the Afghanistan War. And even though they weren't considered Australian citizens until 1967 and were banned from the armed forces in the first half of the 20th century. The bronze sculpture shows a World War I male soldier and a World War II female nurse standing above a kulamon, a traditional Indigenous Australian container. The rainbow serpent surrounds the two figures. This creature is part of the Indigenous Australian creation story and the Dreamtime. A walkway of honour leads to the memorial and has the names of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander men and women who served etched in pavers. Here I am heading up towards the Women's Pioneer Garden, which comes alive during Writers' Week every March. And here's a photo of me at the 2015 Writers' Week in interviewing Tasmanian writer James Boyce about his book, Born Bad. The Women's Pioneer Garden was designed by landscape designer Elsie Cornish, with a statue created by Ola Colm and unveiled by the wife of the then Governor of South Australia, Lady Muriel Barclay Harvey. The garden was planned in 1938 as a tribute to the pioneer women of South Australia. There are 4 park benches facing the garden from the west, which are there to honour 4 women: Carol Roundtree, Elizabeth Webb Nichols, Sybil Irving and Catherine Jean Cleave. There's a marked difference in size between the modest Women's Pioneer Garden and the Torrens Parade Ground, which for much of its life would have been a masculine domain. When it comes to different sizes, as I walk east along North Terrace in front of Government House, I'm struck by the size of the Boer War Memorial and the one of Matthew Flinders compared to that of Dame Roma Mitchell. It reminds me of going to see the statue of Catherine Helen Spence, a pioneer woman from Scotland, a novelist and the first woman candidate to stand for political office in Australia. Catherine Helen Spence was a tiny woman and the statue is life-size, but I was shocked to see how tiny it was tucked away in Light Square. When you've walked east along North Terrace, you've probably noticed the plaques with names set into the pavers. This is the Jubilee Walkway, which was opened in 1986 and formed part of the celebrations of the founding of the South Australian colony by the British in 1836. The walkway has 150 bronze plaques set into the pavement with the names of 170 people significant to the development of South Australia. The walkway begins at the South Australian African or Boer War Memorial and continues down North Terrace past the National War Memorial and past the other cultural institutions, with the plaques laid in alphabetical order. The final plaque with the Jubilee 150 board acknowledging the Adelaide City Council and Hickenbotham's homes is on North Terrace in front of the University of Adelaide's Lidgettwood building. Of the 170 names on the 150 bronze plaques, I counted 23 women, or 13.5%. There is the presence of some Aboriginal Australians, such as the Aboriginal woman Gladys Effick and David Unipon, but there aren't many. If you don't want to walk the walkway, there's an excellent Wikipedia page called Jubilee 150 Walkway, where you see the plaques and where they're located along North Terrace. You could go online and check my counting of women's names and see if I've missed other people with an Aboriginal or non-Anglo heritage. So what do I think now that I'm at the end of the walk? It bothers me still that the Aboriginal War Memorial and the Vietnam Vets War Memorial took so long to be built, and that they are so far from the cultural boulevard that is North Terrace. I'm pleased they're there though, because it does reflect changing attitudes. The layout of statues and memorials and the ongoing presence of Government House speaks to me about Australia's colonial past, about how colonisation is built into and onto the ground. I didn't see the Aboriginal flag on my walk. I didn't see the Torres Strait Islander flag either. I didn't see any information signs in Ghana, only in English. In 2002, the City of Adelaide accepted the need to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Ghana people at the opening of their council meetings. But when it comes to the block I've just walked, I can't see that acknowledgement mapped onto the land at all.